Most people who believe someone is trying to kill them don't stay. They call the police. They leave. They disappear. Eric Richins did something different. He reached for his phone and sent a message that would become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in this entire case. At the time, no detective had opened a homicide investigation. No toxicology report existed. No one outside Eric's closest friends knew what had just happened. Because Eric wasn't dead. He had survived. Barely. Only hours earlier. He had struggled to breathe. His skin erupted in hives. He reached for his son's EpiPen. Then, everything went black. When he finally regained consciousness, he believed he knew exactly why it had happened. He told someone. Then he went home. 17 days later, Eric Richins was dead. 39 years old. A husband. A successful businessman. A father of 3 boys who still believed their dad would be home after work. By sunrise, their lives had changed forever. The woman who called 911 sounded devastated. She told dispatch she had just found her husband unresponsive. At first, it looked like a tragic medical emergency. But one laboratory report would dismantle that explanation. Line by line. Cause of death. Acute fentanyl toxicity. That single finding transformed a grieving widow into the central figure of one of America's most shocking homicide investigations. But proving murder would take far more than suspicion. It would require thousands of phone records, financial documents, digital forensic evidence, witness testimony, and a trail investigators say began weeks before Eric ever took his final breath. Because this wasn't just an investigation into how a man died. It became an investigation into whether his death had been planned, long before anyone realized he was in danger. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part is that Eric may have realized it before anyone else did. When detectives begin investigating a suspicious death, they don't start by looking for monsters. They start by looking for ordinary lives. And on the surface, the Richins family seemed to have built exactly that. A beautiful home, 3 young sons, a growing construction business, investment properties, weekend soccer games, family vacations. From the outside, they looked like a family that had figured life out. Sometimes, appearances become the first piece of misleading evidence. Their story had begun more than a decade earlier. In 2009, Kouri met Eric Richins while working as a cashier at a Home Depot in Utah. Eric worked in construction. He visited often. Eventually, he asked for her number. It sounded like the beginning of an ordinary love story. Friends described them as ambitious, driven, determined to build something together. In June 2013, they married. Within a few years, they were raising 3 boys while building what looked like a successful life. Eric's masonry company continued to grow. Kouri entered real estate. She bought homes, renovated them, sold them. From the outside, it looked like success was coming quickly, but investigators would later discover something important. The image and the reality were becoming 2 very different things. And the reality. Behind closed doors, the financial pressure was mounting. Jurors would later hear testimony from forensic accountant Brooke Carrington, who described a dramatically different financial picture than the one presented publicly. One number appeared after another. Over $7 million in personal debt, millions more in business losses, a negative net worth after Eric's death, daily lender obligations that sometimes exceeded $2,000. Each number painted the same picture. The business empire wasn't expanding. It was struggling to survive. According to the prosecution, the financial strain extended beyond debt. Jurors heard allegations that bank statements had been falsified, loan documents contained Eric's forged signature, and large sums had been withdrawn without his knowledge. Then, Eric discovered something. Money was disappearing from his personal accounts. Credit cards had been used. Loans had been opened, not by strangers, inside his own marriage. That discovery changed Eric. Friends said he became more cautious, more protective, not only of himself, but of his sons. He quietly met with a divorce attorney. He also created something investigators would later describe as one of the most significant decisions he ever made. The Eric Richins Living Trust. Instead of leaving control of his estate to Kouri, he named his sister, Kouri Richins Benson, as trustee, with the assets intended for his son. When toxicology confirmed Eric Richins had died from acute fentanyl toxicity, investigators faced a difficult question. How had the drug gotten into his system? At first, detectives didn't assume foul play. They looked at every possibility: an accident, an unknown source, or someone outside the family. But as they retraced Eric's final weeks, one name kept appearing: his wife, Kouri Richins. Not because of a single piece of evidence, but because several separate threads began pointing in the same direction. Investigators compared text messages, financial records, and interviews with friends and family. According to prosecutors, those records suggested the marriage had become increasingly strained. Eric had reportedly become concerned about money, trust, and decisions being made without his knowledge. He had also taken steps to protect his assets. By this point, detectives believed Eric hadn't died naturally, but believing a crime had happened and proving one were two very different things. One question still stood in the way: where had the fentanyl come from? Investigators began tracing Eric's final days. Phone records, financial transactions, witness interviews. Every lead pointed toward the same objective: finding the source of the drug. According to prosecutors, that search eventually led detectives to a woman they believed had supplied fentanyl to Kouri weeks before Eric's death. She denied knowing what the substance actually was, but investigators believed her testimony helped explain how the drug entered the case. More than a year after Eric Richins' death, the investigation moved from police files to a courtroom. This was no longer about what detectives believed. It was about what prosecutors could prove and what the defense could challenge. Prosecutors laid out a clear theory. They argued that financial pressure, insurance policies, and Eric's growing distrust created a powerful motive. They presented text messages, financial records, expert testimony, and witness statements, alleging they showed careful planning before Eric's death. Their goal was simple: to convince a jury that Eric's death was not an accident, but a deliberate act. The defense saw the case very differently. They argued that the prosecution's timeline relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. They questioned the credibility of key witnesses and challenged investigators' conclusions, maintaining that the state had not proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. As with every criminal trial, the burden of proof remained with the prosecution. Every witness, every exhibit, every expert opinion brought the courtroom closer to one question: would the evidence convince a jury, or would reasonable doubt remain? As the trial continued, every new day brought another piece of evidence, another challenge, another argument. But regardless of the outcome, one reality never changed. 3 young boys had lost their father, and a family would never be the same. Every criminal case eventually reaches a point where the legal arguments begin to fade. The evidence is cataloged. The court filings are archived. The headlines move on. But for the families left behind, life doesn't simply return to normal. For Eric Richins' loved ones, there would always be a chair left empty, a birthday without a father, a holiday that would never feel quite the same, and 3 young boys forced to grow up without the man who had planned to watch them become adults. The legal process will continue to decide the questions that only a courtroom can answer. As with every criminal case, guilt or innocence is determined through the courts, not public opinion. Whatever the final outcome, one truth remains beyond dispute: Eric Richins lost his life at just 39 years old, and the people who loved him continue to live with that loss every single day. Cases like this remind us that homicide investigations are about more than evidence. Behind every exhibit, every courtroom motion, and every headline was a real person, someone whose story ended far too soon. When this documentary began, it began with a single text message, a message sent by a man who believed something was terribly wrong. Whether it was fear, instinct, or a warning, that message would become one of the most talked about pieces of evidence in this case. But it also reminds us of something much larger. Sometimes, the most important evidence isn't found in a laboratory. It's found in the moments people almost overlook. As this case continues through the justice system, its final legal chapter is still being written. Whatever that outcome may be, the impact on Eric's family can never be undone.